Good morning, darlings. Okay, so this is the video I said was going to be long, so I hope that you have been to the loo. I hope you've got a drink and some snacks, some fruit, something to help your brain work, because this is a complicated, complex idea that we are going to have to try and get around. So, on the screen in front of you, it says there's a Google search at the top. It says, why do crises, which is the plural of crisis, have to happen in tragedy? What is the purpose of tragedy? Most definitions of tragedy that we use today come from some parts of the work, the Poetics, written by the philosopher Aristotle. In the simplest terms, Aristotle defined tragedy as a form of drama whose plot is centered on human suffering for the purpose of evoking feelings of pity and fear in the audience. And the key term that we're going to deal with today is hubris. So on the screen in front of you, you have the definition. Hubris describes a personality quality of extreme or foolish pride or dangerous overconfidence, often in combination with arrogance. In its ancient Greek context, it typically describes behavior that defies the norms of behavior or challenges the gods, and in which, in turn, brings about the downfall or nemesis of the perpetrator of hubris. So, essentially, hubris then, in dramatic law, according to Aristotle, has to be punished. If there is hubris, it has to be punished. Now, I know that you guys get sick of me going on and on and on and on and on and on about the West Wing, but Aaron Sorkin is a modern day genius. He is an exceptionally fantastic writer, and there is a podcast and if you haven't watched The West Wing, you should. It's amazing. It's beautiful writing. And there is a podcast that goes through each episode that analyzes what's going on. And on that podcast, sometimes they have guest speakers, and one of which was Aaron Sorkin himself. And this was from a live event. And in season 3, the President Bartlett, the character, um, kills this terrorist, or he has this terrorist killed because of all the things this terrorist has done and has organized and all the rest of it. And he doesn't want to do it, but he's got to. He's got no choice. And so Aaron Sorkin then says, I know, and I was thinking about this, knowing I was coming up here and we were going to talk about this. I was thinking about the random death thing and exactly why do I do that? Because it doesn't really seem like me. And here's what I think the reason is. I write very romantically and idealistically. In this episode, Bartlett, that's President Bartlett, of course, makes an excruciating decision. And this is something I would like to talk more about. He's trying hard to do the right thing, but he says to Leo, who is his chief of staff, in this argument, it's just wrong, okay? It's just wrong. And Leo says, I know, but you got to do it anyway. And Bartlett says, why? And Leo says, because you won, because you're the president, it's your job. And Bartlett makes this decision that he feels terrible about, but he does it. He kills a guy. That's hubris, this dangerous overconfidence and arrogance and all the rest of it. Hubris, says Sorkin, in dramatic law, according to Aristotle, has to be punished. Okay? Bartlett couldn't just kill Sharif, the terrorist, and have the season end there. He had to pay a price. And this is a spoiler alert, and you will cry over this. I cry all the time. He had to be punished. Somebody had to die, so they had to balance stuff out, essentially. And that's what Simon Donovan was brought on to do. So even in modern day writing, people are aware of this dramatic law of hubris, and that there has to be consequences if you are dangerously overconfident. Okay, so I want you to think then, your challenge then is, what term might we call this in modern life? We might call this a particular term, and you'll see this hashtag on Twitter and Instagram, and you'll see it. You may even use this in your everyday speech. And if you don't know what the answer is, think about it. What do we think about when things become even, when people when people suffer consequences for something they did before? stuff like this. There's a term that we use, and you need to think about that. Okay, right. So we are going to talk about examples of hubris in Romeo and Juliet, and this is going to be a lot of me talking and not a lot of work being done on the screen. So you can pause and make notes if you want. Okay, I will bob a copy of this into your shared area so that you can have a look at it. But I do just want to run through this really quickly. This isn't an exhaustive list. Okay, it's not an exhaustive list. I haven't covered everything here, but it is a good place with which to start. So I wrote this down, and it is 4 pages long, but I will get through it as quickly as humanly possible, I promise. So pause if you're not sure about something, rewind, whatever. Okay, right. So hubris then. In Romeo and Juliet, hubris is the term given to a person who is in possession of certain negative personality traits: extreme or foolish pride, dangerous overconfidence, and arrogance. When all 3 of these are combined in the same person, that person can be classed as hubristic. Of course, the most famous example of hubris would be Icarus. So again, we're talking about Greek mythology, who flew too close to the sun. And if you don't know about Icarus, you need to go and research him. In Romeo and Juliet, several characters can be considered hubristic, and we see numerous and various examples of it through the play. Shakespeare offers up the first example during the conversation between Samson and Gregory. When they question whether biting their thumbs will cause an argument, they ask, "Is the law of our side?" Knowing that they are subject to the law for beginning yet another fray between their 2 households, Samson's question indicates that he thinks he could escape the situation without consequence. This demonstrates his foolish pride, his dangerous, for we see the deaths of people involved in the fight shortly afterwards, overconfidence, and his arrogance. He clearly thinks he knows better than whomever laid down the law. From this, the audience is swayed to dislike these disruptive Capulets, which is only reinforced when we see Tybalt's hubris later in the play. Shakespeare introduces hubris at the beginning of the play to establish just how misguided these personality traits are, leading to only severe consequences. The audience cannot expect a happy ending to this tale of young lovers if characters are hubristic because, according to Aristotle's dramatic law, hubris must be punished. Educated members of a Shakespearean audience would understand that Aristotle's influence on Shakespeare and his work, and would understand the need for tragedy where hubris occurs. There must, after all, be a balance in the world. Tybalt is immediately presented as an overly confident character, and he says, "What, drawn and talk of peace? I hate hell, all Montagues, and thee." This quote, he says, "I hate the word as I hate hell, all Montagues, and thee." And we did this a little bit before, didn't we, when we were looking at Benvolio. And this correlates with an audience's dislike of the Capulets. He is an arrogant character who will, almost certainly, before the consequences of his hubris and penchant for fighting, disruption and killing, and his fate will be death. This, which falls at the climax of the play, will help to allow the following and helps allow the following falling action to be restorative, contributing to the restoration of balance in Verona's world and its ultimate peace. His arrogance is heightened during the Capulet's ball. Do you remember when you saw him at the Capulet's ball? We see how perturbed he is to discover Romeo has attended. And he says, "It fits when such a villain is a guest. I will not endure him." Here, the pronoun "I'll" indicates he believes that he has more power in the Capulet household than his uncle whom he is addressing. Coupled with the adverb "not" signifies he believes his status is higher than that which he occupies. This hubristic attitude is not only curtailed when his uncle replies, "He shall be endured," and "You are a saucy boy." Despite this command and criticism of his character, he continues in his arrogance and seeks revenge the next day. The audience, understanding Aristotle's rules of dramatic law, can anticipate Tybalt's downfall then, and during his interaction with Mercutio, are rewarded for their consideration of the bigger themes within the play. Tybalt, though, is not isolated in his hubris. Mercutio, too, is hubristic in his own conduct. Mercutio is presented early in the play as a high-spirited young man of Verona, quick-witted and excitable. Nay, gentle Romeo, we must have you dance. So here, this is what he says to Romeo. The modal verb must suggests he is a leader within the group of friends. Shakespeare has combined this with the verb dance to give the audience the first lasting impression of a young gentleman who enjoys life, perhaps to excess, and is overly confident in his demand of Romeo, our protagonist. Whilst he can be seen to be trying to cheer Romeo up, his arrogance is presented in the manner of his command, this imperative verb. It is as if he thinks he knows what is better for Romeo than Romeo himself does. Despite this, Shakespeare almost lulls the audience into a false sense of security by presenting Mercutio in such a light-hearted manner, which makes the audience adore him almost as much as Romeo does. When Mercutio describes Romeo, "You are a lover, borrow Cupid's wings and soar with them above a common bound," it is not only to convey Romeo's caring rather than confrontational personality to the audience, but rather give an insight into Mercutio's depth of understanding of Romeo's personality and what his opinion of Romeo is, and how much Mercutio cares about Romeo. We will, of course, see that Mercutio takes Romeo's place in fighting Tybalt, and an audience may be unwilling to believe that this is solely due to his own hubristic personality, because of the likable personality that Shakespeare has given his prophetic young character. This quote of Mercutio's, then, also offers the audience a glimpse of his opinions of love. He does not shun the idea nor criticise Romeo for being a caring, loving young man. In fact, he commands him with the imperative verb, borrow Cupid's wings and soar with them, to pursue his romantic nature. He is hoping to encourage Romeo to do whatever it is that makes him happy. This can be seen as a mark of a true friend, which makes his hubris all the more shocking to the audience when it engulfs him. Despite Mercutio being a caring, likable character, his hubris is his flaw. His hubris coincides with Tybalt's hubris in Act 3, Scene 1. From this, no good can possibly arise. Hubris begets hubris, and tragic disaster is the only possible conclusion. Both men's extreme and foolish pride, arrogance, and dangerous overconfidence cause their deaths, Aristotle's dramatic law punishing them both to the utmost. Their lives do indeed pay the forfeit of the peace, which is what the prince said back in Act 1. The tone of this interaction between the two characters needs to be examined in order to fully comprehend the extent of their hubris. Shakespeare crafts Act 3, Scene 1, the climax of the entire play, to be a scene of ever-increasing tension, action, and conflict. This guarantees the audience saturation and investment in the characters. A scene filled with action and tension, resulting in two deaths and the banishment, creates an audience much more emotionally invested than if their deaths had been merely reported by secondary characters. Wary of the prince's warnings, the interaction begins with feigned politeness from Tybalt. "Good-e'en, a word with one of you." Despite using the greeting "good-e'en," the omission of any further manners and the demand "a word with one of you" depicts his arrogance and distaste for the other household, perhaps even his excessive pride. These being two of the three elements of hubris. When he then goes on to accuse Mercutio of consorting with Romeo, which for Tybalt is a bone of contention due to Mercutio's having been invited to the ball alongside his brother Valentine, he reveals how betrayed by Mercutio he feels. This lays down the foundation for his willingness to fight him later in the scene. Consorting is a verb which implies not only friendly association, but with Tybalt's accusing tone that Mercutio has caused offence through time spent with Romeo, as though Mercutio has fraternised with the enemy and that this should be punished. Tybalt, being the fiery character he is, takes it upon himself to issue the punishment for this perceived crime. This adds to the tension of the play and the scene, especially considering the prince's early warning about if ever your lives shall disturb the streets again, etc. Tybalt, however, prioritises and redirects his anger as he addresses Romeo as soon as he sees him. Well, peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man. Despite the tone between Mercutio and Tybalt increasing in tension, Tybalt here is still being moderately polite. He uses the noun sir, just as we saw Samson and Gregory do at the beginning, to ensure his lexical choice remains civil. Lexical choice meaning his words that he chooses. However, his tone is that of annoyance. Although the letter M can be soft in my man, it is said with force in a threatening tone, indicating that Romeo is the desired prey of his anger almost. He's preying upon him like a hawk might do. During this interaction, then, we see each element of Tybalt's hubris, his arrogance, thinking that he's more knowledgeable than his uncle, to take offence to Romeo's presence at the Capulets' ball, his overconfidence, thinking he is more able to enact retribution, taking it upon himself to administer the punishment he perceives as necessary, and his foolish pride to think that he would not suffer any consequences for the actions he is willing to take when he confronts Romeo. When he challenges Romeo and says, "Thou art a villain, boy, this shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me, therefore turn and draw," his hubris prevents him from considering any possible outcome other than his own victory over his adversary. This is particularly evidenced when he uses the noun boy to insult Romeo's young age, insinuating that he, a man, cannot lose against someone so young. The audience here may feel that Tybalt is becoming even more of a dislikable character than he has been before, being so endeared with Romeo through our exposure to his interactions with Juliet and Mercutio's opinion of him alongside the friars. Tybalt's hubris, then, is further augmented in this challenge of Romeo, as he was present when the prince offered his warning, "If ever you disturb our streets again, your life shall pay the forfeit of the peace." It's not like he doesn't know about it. Romeo, however, was not, and could be excused for being less fearful of the warning. Commanding Romeo to turn and draw emphasises Tybalt's intentions. He wishes for nothing less than to murder Romeo in revenge for having attended a ball he was not invited to. In a city in which the prince is the sole character to issue and carry out the threat and punishment of death, Tybalt has no right to overestimate his importance. This is hubris, his biggest flaw and the ultimate step towards his own death. Romeo's hubristic tendencies come from the pursuit of his need for love. His attempts to woo Rosaline fall upon deaf ears. She will not be hit with Cupid's arrow. She hath Dian's wit, which connotes her chastity. And Romeo's arrogance, dangerous overconfidence, and foolish pride are displayed early in the play, here each contributing to him being rejected by her. Now, whilst Romeo did not attend Capulet's ball specifically to meet Juliet, indeed, he only agreed to attend in order to prove his cousin Benvolio wrong. "Thou canst not teach me to forget Rosaline." His hubris in pursuing her is apparent when he climbs over the orchard walls to create the famous balcony scene, which we've just a couple of videos ago we just analysed. Having been overly confident in his meeting with her during the ball, in kissing her, "Thus from my lips, by thine, my sin is purged," he displays his arrogance, thinking that he knows better than a priest or God as to how his sin might be purged. For a Catholic character is the ultimate arrogance and pride. You cannot know better than God if you are Catholic. After all, who is Romeo to decide how his sin might be purged and that his penance is to kiss Juliet? Who is he to decide that? However, the average audience member of the time might not understand this point in its entirety, many families having converted to the Church of England to being Protestant, some 63 years earlier when it was formed, and be unaware of the intricacies of Catholicism as the potentially 2 or 3 generations had passed. They would still be aware of the major principles, but maybe not these fine details. Okay, when he uses the personified metaphor, thy kinsmen are no stop to me, I have night's cloak to hide me, his dangerous overconfidence is clear. Unfortunately for Romeo, though, Juliet's kinsmen do indeed stop him. He is a victim of Tybalt's hubris in that he loses his best friend to him and his freedom to remain in the same city as his wife. Marrying Juliet without anyone other than Friar Lawrence and the nurse knowing is also hubristic. Arrogance, overconfidence, and foolish pride all factor into his venture. To marry the daughter of his enemy was, perhaps, one step too far in pursuit of his love. The ripple effect of Romeo's hubris leads him to being banished, not getting the message of the friar's plan, hearing that only Juliet is dead, and his suicide. All this can be attributed to his hubris. An audience may be critical of Romeo's character, thinking, if only. However, his was not the only hubris which contributed to the tragic outcome of the play. Friar Lawrence's hubris is perhaps the worst of all the characters, the most impactful, and the most, albeit well-intentioned, misguided. When Romeo informs him of his love for Juliet, the friar spends a while chastising young Romeo for forgetting Rosaline so quickly, for being so fickle in the art of love, and he says, "Is Rosaline, whom thou didst love so dear, so soon forsaken? Young men's love then lies not truly in their hearts, but in their eyes." Here he criticises Romeo's lustful ways, yet agrees to his request to marry the two youngsters, and says, "In one respect I'll thy assistant be." Here his hubris is, like Romeo's, in thinking he knows better than God. These star-crossed lovers have been born into a situation where they are not destined to be happily married due to their family's feud. Friar Lawrence takes it upon himself to try and mend the feud, and does so without either set of parents' knowledge. Thus, his arrogance indicates he thinks he knows better what is better for the children than their families do. Of course, in one respect, this may be true. As a priest, he is more frequently involved with the events of both Romeo's and Juliet's lives than their respective parents. He does, after all, hear their confessions on a regular basis. And as a Catholic, your priest is your best friend. Romeo and Juliet clearly would have spent more time with the friar than either of their parents, their respective parents. However, though, the audience may be left wondering whether he is in a position to be making such life-changing decisions. After all, he did not bring either child into the world, nor did he do so with any specific design in mind. It is not for him to decide how either lord wants to increase his house's power and wealth, which in the Elizabethan era was the objective of wealthy families. Instead, he allowed his hubris to act, marrying them in the hope of turning their household's rancor to pure love. The abstract noun love is the Catholic priest's ultimate aim. However, his hubris prevents him from considering that his actions may make matters even worse. He does not consider for a moment that the union may bring about the children's deaths. His hubris leads to the biggest tragedy of the play. Fate, it seems, will have its way no matter what the friar tries to do and prevent it. The star-crossed lovers will indeed be prevented from living their married life together as the friar plans. His plan, which is inherently flawed because of his dangerous overconfidence, foolish pride in his planning abilities, and arrogance, fails to acknowledge any possible misaligning of events. This, according to Aristotle's dramatic law, must be punished and is punished through the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. After all, there must be a balance in the world for all the wrongdoings done by the townsfolk of Verona, the culmination and equivalent of which is the deaths of the two newlyweds. It is only this which can end the feud and resolve the hatred. Aristotle's structural theory, therefore, is applicable. The resolution of the play is not at the same level as the exposition. Everlasting grief must be being a consequence of hubris. From this, an audience can take away the moral of the story. Hubris begets hubris, and tragic disaster is the only possible conclusion. So it is better to avoid being hubristic. So, what I want you to do then is, on the screen in front of you, I know that I've just like rattled through all that, and that is absolutely fine. And you can use some of those examples, but I don't want you to use them all. So on the screen in front of you, you've got, where do we see examples of hubris in Romeo and Juliet? So we've got extreme foolish pride, dangerous overconfidence, and arrogance. So these three things make up this. Okay, we need to see where we see different examples. Okay. Unpleasantly proud as and behaving as if you are more important than or know more than other people. That's another way of saying hubris. Okay, now I need you to look through the play, find some quotes. This can be anywhere in the play, anywhere at all. It doesn't have to be what we've only studied so far. Now, in order to help you, I've given you some characters to consider, and I've mentioned Friar Lawrence, Mercutio, Tybalt, Samson, sort of Gregory, and Romeo. I haven't mentioned Lord Capulet, but I also haven't mentioned all the examples of their hubris. So what I want you to do is go through the play and have a look, and you can research this. You don't have to do it yourselves. You can have a look, you can discuss this in groups, you can get yourself onto FaceTime or whatever and do a little study group and see if you can't split the play up between you, swap notes, whatever you want to do. It's absolutely fine, but I want you to seriously consider all the different examples we might see of these people acting with hubris, with these people, their hubristic nature coming through. Okay, that's what I want you to do for this lesson, please, for this video. I do realize I've spoken for a very long time. It is 27 minutes or so, and that's fine. And you may need to pause and make notes, but I will drop in what I've just read out to you so that you can go through it with a fine-tooth comb as well. I will also put in some questions for you to answer into the submissions folder to do with that essay, to make sure that you understand it properly and in its entirety, because this is a really complex issue, and this is something which you really do have to focus on and concentrate with. Okay, so that's what you're going to do today. Make sure that you are typing this up or taking a photo of it and sending me your ideas, please, because this is so complex. I really do need to make sure and check that you are on the right train. You are on the right track and you're on the right train of thought. You have the right train of thought. Okay, so please make sure you are checking the shared area for lesson 17 and the hubris essay and the hubris questions. And then you can do this task here. Okay, stay safe, wash your hands, social distance, all of that. Like and subscribe. Jokes offs. Bye.